Hey everybody, so as you may have heard, there's a little bit of controversy going around with the release of the UR Zazan character, and I just kind of wanted to give my thoughts about the whole situation, and sort of the way I wanted to do that was by trying to analyze Gumi's reasoning as to why they made him limited and why they didn't give as many festival medals as they usually do. And so I also wanted to take a look at the JP versus global comparison. And I also wanted to take a look back at the other festivals and compare the events to this current event that we're seeing now. So let's get right into it. And so the first thing I wanted to do is sort of look at the difference between the JP and the global side of things. So as you guys know, JP decided to band together and all the top guilds decided to boycott the release of Duane. And so the reason why we had that is, as you look here, the first three units here are what JP got in a slightly different order. So by the time they got to Duane, they basically had three double cost units in a row, 3 months in a row. So the 100 cost there that you see is the cost per shard in Visure. So if we take a look at that, we have three in a row of 100 cost. So our situation here in global is a little bit different. By the time we got to Zazan, we had 3 months in a row of double cost units, or 100 cost units if you want to call them that. And the last two weren't necessarily double cost. Their cost per Visure shard, their Visure cost per shard was 50 Visure per shard. So technically it wasn't the same and it wasn't as bad as what they had in Japan. One thing to definitely note, however, is that we do get all four of the units. Granted, the original release of Duane was months and months ago, so it's kind of hard to really count that as too much at once. So if we look on the right side here, the JP total of these 3 months was 300. They're basically three double cost units, and for the global total, going by my 150 separation here, was 200. If you want to go back and count Duane, it's technically 100. So if you're pulling Duane now, technically it's like a 300 cost, total. But we're kind of going to go by Duane's original release date because he's technically a rerun, and you would have bought him back in the day when he first came out. So another kind of thing I wanted to compare here in the JP server is the Glaciella release. So the Glaciella alternate UR fanboat, she is basically the same thing as Zazan, except for the one difference of her being she's not limited, basically. And so I know that's one thing that people are sort of arguing about, but I think we kind of need to kind of see each release as a different thing. So let's keep going. So what exactly did we get out of the fanboat? Like, what separates these two units from each other and from other limited units? So basically here in the global version of the game, we received a free to start vision card featuring the number 1, 2, and 3 winners of the vote. We have basically a vision card that affects the game. You can equip this card and affect the stats of your units. So we have a vision card. So the JP server didn't get a vision card, but they did get the 2 second and third place winners of the fan vote featured in the limit burst of the winner of the fan vote, which was Glaciella. So right there, I kind of see this as a difference. In JP, it was sort of like, yay, Glaciella won, and here's this cool little limit burst animation. But it seems in the global version that they actually invested some resources into putting a vision card together and sort of giving us a way to, affect the game actually, and giving us an extra thing to kind of work on. So in my view, Gumi's perspective of the Zazan side of things is that they wanted to add another unit to the existing FF universe. So this FFBE universe, I would consider Duane and I would consider Faevia as part of that. And so they kind of just wanted to give us another unit to kind of put into there. And so the other thing is that they might have seen, I don't actually have the numbers of how much money they made off of Duane, but they may have just said, we were successful with Duane, so let's sort of position Zazan to be a similar type of unit. So I kind of right away said, like, these aren't really good views. And sort of the reason I kind of thought of that was that Zazan isn't really an FFBE character any more than Glaciella is. They're both WOTV characters, and they're technically similar on the same level. So I don't think that's really enough to justify them being different. So, but let's get into the next section here. And so one other thing I kind of decided to look at, and I sort of thought of this as the fan vote expectation. Back when it was announced, like, what was our expectation in voting for this, right? We kind of already had a few UR units that were sort of alternate versions of units that we already had. So in my eyes, the expectation was for us to get a similar type of unit. So for example, if we would have voted for Salire, Salire ended up already being planned. So if we would have voted for Salire, would Salire have had a limited version of herself? Would it have been another version? Would we have had two different ones? Who really knows? It's kind of hard to tell with that. But sort of what I wanted to point out is that every single other alternate version of a unit has been limited. So not only that, and the other thing I kind of wanted to point out was that every single other alternate version of a unit that we've gotten so far has been paired with another unit. So for example, the winter ones, we got them in pairs, and the Halloween ones, we got them in pairs. The only one that wasn't really in a pair was Salire. So in the JP version, she was limited, and that's why she has the asterisk there. And in the global version, she wasn't limited. So since she was kind of by herself, I guess they decided to pair her up with Warrior of Light, and that was kind of their way of saying, like, hey, let's release 2 units at a time, because that seems to be their strategy. Release 2 limited units at a time. That's how they make their money. I don't really know why they decide that, but that's part of their strategy. And so as I kind of think of Zazan, I think they were kind of thinking along the same way, where they wanted to release him with another unit or another group of units. They didn't want to just release him on his own, because I guess they won't make as much money that way. I don't really know their full reasoning on that. And so looking on the left and right as I have it divided here, I'm kind of seeing, like, you're kind of asking yourself, like, why did I divide it into limited and unlimited? Like, how does this make sense? Well, I guess the only way I can make sense of this is that units who have their alternate costume in the story are positioned as unlimited. So these were kind of the ones that were made to be part of, like, the actual canon story. And sort of the other ones are kind of just more of a costume or, like a fun little thing. So as that logic applies to both Mont and Helena, because we see them both in the story. Granted, we haven't seen Helena as much, but we did see her with her Black Rose outfit on. So far, the only exception to this rule is Glaciella. So I don't really have reasoning for this. This is like so far into the future. I don't really know how Glaciella is going to play into the story, and I don't really know. I haven't really followed the Japanese story, so I don't really know if she has a different outfit in the story, or I don't know what's going on. So I can't really say that much, but in terms of all the other units, I think it starts to add up. It starts to line up a little bit better when you think of it that way, and that sort of gives you a reason why Zazan is limited. I'm going to get into Salire in a little bit, but let's continue. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to touch on before I get into the event comparison is Duane single cost versus double cost. So originally, Duane was released as a premium unit in global, so he was basically a double cost unit, and he was limited. And we did get that special bundle where we were able to buy him for $49. That was great. I know it helped a lot of people. I didn't personally buy him, but it did help a lot of people. A lot of people like that. So I think with the double cost versus single cost, I think the problem with that is people are reading too much into the JP announcement that was made recently, where single units or double cost units were going to retroactively be changed into single cost units. And that was a very recent announcement. I believe, so as part of the third sentence there, I believe we were told that 100 cost units weren't exactly going to be changed if they were from the past. So I couldn't actually find a source from that. I think that might have actually been in the JP side that they said that, and then they sort of decided to change. And so the other thing I also wanted to mention before I move on is that the Mindsphere glitch in the shop, I think people were definitely reading a little bit too much into that. So let's go into our next slide. And so the next slide is going to be the current JP version cost. So I literally just took this screenshot today. Today is technically Sunday already in Japan. Today is Saturday here. But you can see that Oberon has already been added to the game, to the, I guess that's the shop there. So you can see how current this is, even though they kind of made this announcement. You can take a look at Queen Helena and Stern and Duane, and you can still see that Queen Helena is still double cost, and so is Stern, and their Duane is single cost. So the fact that people are expecting Duane to have become single cost for this event kind of just isn't lining up for me. So that's kind of my reasoning for that. All right, so let's get into each event. And sort of the way I kind of grouped this together was sort of the whole stretch. So I think originally festival tokens or medals, whatever you want to call them, the reason that they came up with those is just because we had this whole gauntlet of, limited units that they wanted to release on us. And essentially they were a way to kind of help us, you can spend a little bit, but you also got a lot of value out of them. And that sort of helped you sort of build up a lot of those units. Technically, I am including the Final Fantasy IV units, but I don't think they were actually part of any kind of medal stuff. I think the medal stuff started with Duane and then sort of continued into the winter festivities. So I kind of want to break down the units. So 7 units at single cost for 50 Visor times 600 shards. So back then we didn't have EX jobs for these units. So that's the calculation I'm using. I'm only using 600 shards, and then it's going to be single cost for 7 of the units. So that calculation is 210 Visor. So this is sort of, I know that there was free shards, and I know it takes Visor to kind of pull the unit, but I sort of just wanted to make an easy calculation to sort of just see the total value of the unit. So please forgive me on that. Like, that's the best way I could do it. And I know Cecil was free, and I understand that, but so technically it's one less unit, but using my way of figuring out the value of each unit, I'm sort of still counting all his shards. And yes, I understand that a lot of them were free, but you still had to kind of build them, and you still kind of sort of had to manage your Visor around that. And so at the bottom there, I'm just doing 1 times 100 times 600. So that's going to be the double cost for Duane. And in total, that's going to be 270,000 Viz if you're able to build all of them from 0 to max. And in this case, it was max level of 99. So really the next event, festival event, was sort of the Final Fantasy 7 or Final Fantasy 10 and the Nier combined. So this is really 5 units, and this is, single cost units times. But the difference here is that we're going from 0 to EX. So this is going from 0 to 120. So this is going to be 1,000 shards total. So that's going to be a 5 times 50 times 1,000, and that's going to total 250,000. And again, I'm not counting the Mindsphere shop. I'm not counting, the bingo boards. I'm not counting anything like that. I'm just sort of, I'm not counting the free shards that you can get from there. I'm just sort of giving a value to this. Okay, so let's kind of look at the current situation. And so I'm kind of just thinking back to like, what necessarily do I want to count as part of the stretch? And so right away, I'm definitely getting rid of Mont because you were able to build Mont with metals. I don't remember if you exactly had full access to all the metals, but you definitely had metal access to Mont. And I believe he was actually single cost on metal. I'm not entirely sure, but I definitely don't really want to count him as part of this calculation. This hell stretch wasn't definitely anywhere near as bad as the JP version of the hell stretch. So Helena was single cost. I'm not sure if I want to count her, and Salire was technically made limited, so I'm not sure if I really want to count her. I'm really just thinking of the limited units and assuming that you're going to be able to build the rest of them. There's no real rush to build the rest of them. So here in the next slide, I kind of just took the limited units and counted them all separately. So sort of what I did here was I made a full build comparison. So 0 to 1,000 shards, going from nothing to not even having the unit to fully maxing and EXing them. And so for the 3 single cost units, this is including Zazan, it's going to be 3 times 50 times 1,000 shards. So that's going to be 150,000. And then for Duane, that's 100 shards times, or 100 Visual times 1,000 shards times 1, which is 100,000 for a total of 250,000. And if you think of it that way, then yes, this is pretty much the same exact value as, maybe not exactly the same, but it's around there, the same as, the total Final Fantasy X and Nier stuff, or the total of the Final Fantasy IV and Winter units. However, we did have the chance to build these units in the past, so these are technically going to be counted for me as a rerun build, or I'm saying for me, but I really mean for Gumi. Gumi is going to count these as sort of the rerun build. So instead of counting all 1,000 shards, I'm only going to count the 400 EX shards. So total cost for the single units is going to be 2 times single cost units, 2 times 50 times the 400 EX shards. So that's only 40,000 Viz. That's technically still a lot of Viz, but it's much more manageable. If you're counting Duane as the rerun unit, it's going to be 1 times 100 times 400, and that's going to be 40,000. And Zazan is going to count as a full build no matter what. So that's going to be 1 times 50 times 1,000, so that's 50,000. Technically, it costs more to build Zazan than it does to build 2 single cost units, considering you're going from 99 to EX. So the total of that is 130,000 Viz, which is about half of what it would take for one of the other festival events. So right off the bat, you can kind of see, if you do the calculation that way, Gumi doesn't really see this as much as an opportunity for you guys to spend as much Visual. So that's kind of part of the reason why maybe they're hesitant to sort of give us as many festival tokens as they have in the past. And I think this is definitely part of the reason why they definitely made Zazan limited, because this doesn't really seem like it's a lot for Gumi to make as much, for people to make as much purchases if it would not have been limited. So they kind of do want to be paid. I guess they want to be paid for the amount of work that they put into Zazan. So that's kind of the way I'm seeing it. So let's keep going with the breakdown. So one other thing to mention is the vision cards. So for the festivals, each one of them basically had 2 UR vision cards to build. We're not going to count the Mughal one because all the shards were free, but Final Fantasy X also had an MR vision card. It was handed out for free, but you had to build it yourself. And for this current festival that we have now, we technically do have 2 UR, but again, they're both rerun cards, and it's not like the vision cards get EX or anything, so whoever had them built already doesn't even have to worry about maxing them. So they kind of count in a different way, and thinking of it in terms of a rerun, that's essentially Gumi sees that as less of an opportunity to get people to spend. And so one other thing that I kind of wanted to mention was the Salire factor. And so I think when Salire came out, we sort of assumed that she was sort of made limited because of the whole, protest and, censorship and whatnot. Like maybe she became unmarketable. But in reality, I think the reason that they made her limited, at least part of the reason, is that they wanted to kind of position. They were kind of looking for a place to put Zazan somewhere in the timeline, and I think this is probably the best spot that they found for him. So they wanted to make him be a premium unit. They wanted to make him be limited, because I guess since he won the vote, like they kind of knew, like, hey, the fans are going to want this, so let's try to, our strategy is to make money off of this. So that's kind of why they sort of positioned him here. And so because of that, Salire kind of just became limited. They were like, you know what? Maybe this is too many units at once. And so my speculation is that it could be possible that if people didn't protest Salire, we would have had her as unlimited, and we would have probably gotten more medals to help us build like all these units at the same time. However, there is one little thing, is that since Duane is not limited in Japan, they sort of had to give us something that was not limited here, and I think that's more so the reason why they went with Salire being limited. And it kind of also made sense because they wanted to make Zazan limited, so they kind of just decided not to make her limited. So I think those two things kind of played a factor in making Zazan limited. So kind of want to talk about all the other features that were kind of added in terms of helping you get shards. So the Mind Sphere Exchange Shop, we technically did get it earlier than the JP side. JP got it around the time of Camilo's release and Warrior of Light, and we got it around the time of Luel. So technically we had earlier access to it, and we were able to, I believe we were able to build Queen Helena with it. But in terms of limited units, it didn't really make much of a difference because both versions had Warrior of Light as the first limited unit that could use the exchange shop. So it didn't really make that much of a difference, with the exception of the Duane glitch, which I know a lot of people kind of ended up buying those those Mind Spheres, and they were removed from their account, but their counter wasn't reset, so now they're kind of paying that higher value, and I'm not sure if Gumi has fixed that yet to this day. So sort of one thing I wanted to mention. And so let's kind of take a look overall, like what was available during each event. So for the Final Fantasy IV stretch, Barracks was not available. Obviously, Barracks was made available during the EX transition and during Final Fantasy X. Mind Spheres were not applicable because these were level 99 units. And granted, I believe the second batch of winter units released as EX available units in Japan. Technically, they weren't like that here. We still don't have the EX for them, so there's no need for Mind Spheres on our side, and we don't have any access to the guild summons when it came to the Final Fantasy IV whole stretch. So that kind of is kind of what's making the difference now. For Final Fantasy X, we did have Barracks, so that was one extra way of getting shards. We sort of had the Mind Sphere shop. I believe now we have an unlimited amount of Mind Spheres that we can get. Technically, we did have a Mind Sphere shop, but it was limited to 150 or 200. I'm not entirely sure. I don't remember. So that's kind of why I give that a check and an X. And for Final Fantasy X and Nier, we did not have guild summons. Guild summons started with King Mont, so they just weren't available. But now for this current event, we have access to all three of those, and I feel like the guild summons have been pretty decent. You get a guaranteed 70, and you have a chance to get a little bit more. And 70 over the week, usually it's only 1 week. And once you get each unit to EX, you do have access to the Mind Sphere shop, so you're able to kind of just increase them even, at least, probably a certain percentage above what you would normally get. And so that sort of adds up to some less shards that you have to buy. Okay, so one other thing that I kind of wanted to mention is I feel, at least in my experience, I feel like the Chocobo expeditions have gotten a lot better in terms of drop rate. So here is a screenshot of a drop that I had. Granted, this was Fever, and I used the tickets. And granted, I had Camillo at the time that he was the max unit, and I was able to get 5 Warrior of Lights. So I think that's actually pretty good for, you know, your once a day Fever. And so I haven't actually tried to get shards for any of the new characters. I don't have any of the large bonus, but I would assume that the drop rates are similar for the current units, being Friavilla, Zazan. Technically, I don't know, I guess Duane is technically a half drop rate unit, so I'm not even entirely sure about that. But I would assume that the drop rates have gotten better the same way that they got for Warrior of Light. So that's sort of another way for us to get shards. So in totality, I'm pretty much just kind of pointing out different ways to get shards that have sort of come to us from the Japanese side. The Japanese, when they had that Final Fantasy IV stretch, they didn't really have any tokens available to them. So I believe like the GL summons and the Mind Sphere shop were kind of just made to offset that, just because Gumi kind of knows, like, yeah, we're going to have stretches like this, so let's sort of help the players. And sort of now that we have them here in Global, I feel like it's starting to make a little bit less sense for them to be giving us festival medals as often. Kind of my opinion, I guess, on that. But let us keep going here. And so one other thing that I wanted to point out was that these summons, they actually gave us a pretty decent deal when it came to these summons. If you look at the Zazan pity banner, so the non-9-step banner, you actually have enhanced rates on all 3 units. So Friavia is actually a higher chance of getting than Zazan. But also this kind of gives you the opportunity. So let's say you are building all 3 units from scratch, which I feel like that's one of the arguments of the boycott. That sort of gives you the opportunity to just pull, like you just pull basically, and keep pulling until you get 1 unit. And so instead of thinking of it as a 40k pity, you kind of just keep going until you get 1 unit, and then you probably just want to pity the other unit. So granted, you're probably gonna have to get either Zazan or Duane, because you probably wouldn't want to waste your pity on Friavia. So you're gonna keep pulling until you get either Zazan or Duane, and then you sort of use your tokens to buy the other one that you didn't get. And sort of that's really the only strategy that kind of makes sense. And I guess, Gumi kind of gave us a little bit of a, chance to do a little bit better on that. Granted, I know that people would have preferred to just buy the token straight up and just be able to buy the unit. But I feel like that was sort of a special exception that they kind of made for the original Duane. I feel like that's sort of the specialness of Duane, is like you were just able to straight up buy the unit. I kind of never really expected to get that again, but I don't know, like that's kind of how I see it, basically. Like that's sort of what made Duane special. And again, let me just keep going, because I feel like there's a few other opportunities here that sort of make it a little bit easier for Duane. For Zazan, granted, you can't outright buy him, but it does make it a little bit easier. So sort of another thing I wanted to point out were the 9-step summons. Each unit has their own 9-step summons, and only that unit has the enhanced rate on their particular banner. So I think that's sort of a little bit of a bonus. If we look back to Warrior of Light, he did not get a 9-step summon. If you wanted his Blossoms, I guess you would have had to pull for Salire on her 9-step summon. So that's sort of, I guess, one special thing they did for this festival. And so Also, I kind of wanted to point out, as part of Hiroki's gift, we did get 6 free blossoms. And that was sort of the last thing everybody was complaining about. Hey, Gumi, we need blossoms, we need blossoms. So they kind of are listening to our complaints, and they did give us those blossoms. So I think that's definitely one thing to sort of give them credit for. Okay, so the next thing I kind of wanted to point out is, let's start on the right with the shops. So with the shops, we actually were given 3 sets of shards for each unit. I think originally last time when they reran Duane and Frievia, I'm pretty sure that there was only one, you were only able to buy 1 bundle of 40 per unit. Then you also get the paid bundle, which is technically using Paid Vis, but it's going at the rate where it's half the price of the regular shards, at least for Duane, and you get a couple of other goodies. So if we're kind of looking at the right, I know again that people were disappointed that we're not able to get the medals, and you're not able to purchase Zazan outright, or Duane for that matter. But if you kind of look at these are actually really good deals. You get around $24.50 paid Visier for $39.99, and you also get 100 shards. So if you think of the Zazan shards, they're worth about 5,000 Visier if you were to buy them straight outright. So technically, you're essentially getting $24.50 paid Visier, and you're getting 5,000 free Visier. So if you think of the normal deal where it's like $100 for 6,000 paid and 4,000 free, this is actually a pretty good value in terms of quote-unquote free Visier. I know it's not exactly Visier, but you are getting those 100 shards, and I think that's actually pretty good. And if you buy the same pack for Duane, the shards actually have double the value, so you're actually getting 10,000 Visier worth of shards. So again, I think that's actually a pretty good deal. 10,000 free Visier is really hard to come by. Really, the only way I see of getting 10,000 free Visier is to buy those limited monthly packs where you get 400 Visier a day. And at the end of the month, I think that adds up to around 12,000. So that's pretty much about the price value that you're getting here when you buy the Duane pack. So the Duane pack is worth double what it costs for Zazan and for Frievia. Alright, so sort of after having thought about that, let's sort of ask ourselves the question, is this really a festival? What are the pros of this festival? We did get a bunch of special shop deals, which, as I kind of just talked about, they are actually pretty good deals. We did also get Hiroki's gift, which gave us those 6 blossoms. I believe there's also a rainbow broadstone in there, and a bunch of other usual goodies that we get. We got some Viz, so I think that's definitely a good thing. As I mentioned, we have this special pity banner where all 3 units are enhanced rate on them. So as I said, the strategy to me is you want to go for one of the double cost units and then pity the other one and use sort of the tokens to buy them as pity if you're starting from scratch. If you're starting with Zazan, you do have that banner that gives you 50 tokens. So you could just sort of do 150 tokens worth of pulls if you have to, and then use that 50 tokens to sort of round out the guaranteed purchase. And as I mentioned, all 3 units have 9 steps, which that specific unit has their enhanced rate, and each one of them you have the opportunity to get the 6 blossoms, unlike what we had with Warrior of Light. So I think it's a little bit better, and I think they are giving us a decent deal in terms of that. So what are the cons? There's a limited amount of festival medals, but sort of as I kind of went over, I feel like medals are kind of losing their, not necessarily losing their value. Obviously, they still have good value, but in terms of Gumi handing them out to us, Gumi isn't getting as much of a win from them. So they're kind of losing their value to Gumi in terms of that. So they kind of didn't really want to give us as many medals as they kind of gave us for these past events. So you kind of got to see it from their perspective a little bit. The next con on the list is a short time limit. We technically only have 2 weeks, but this is the same as the other alternate costume units. technically Zazan is 100 cost, but he is still technically single cost. So it's sort of on the same level. Granted, I will definitely give you guys that we do have a bunch of limited units to build all at the same time. So definitely feel like maybe a little bit more time would be a little helpful. Maybe at least a little bit more time for the shop or for maybe the Chocobo expeditions or something like that. And sort of the last con on the list is that the vote still doesn't really seem all that special. Granted, we were pretty much voting for an alternate unit. We did get the vision card and, you know, that kind of stuff. But again, sort of, I will definitely give you that the fact that they didn't really necessarily do anything super extra for this specific event that we're having right now. And also back to the pros, I wanted to point out for the 9-step that if you do Duane's banner, he gets the same amount of shards and everything as everyone else for the same price. So again, that's another opportunity for you to get double the value out of that because you're getting those double cost shards for the same value. Alright, so basically this is sort of my overall opinion of this. After doing the math, it kind of seems like it's more fair than I initially expected, especially when you factor in those deals and etc. If you're starting from scratch, I don't necessarily think it's fair to expect to build all 4 units really easily from scratch. I think that's a little bit much to be able to expect that, considering that these are all rerun, these are all rerun units except for Zazan. The time limit is definitely short, but as I mentioned, the special shop deals are kind of there. The 9 steps are there, so you do have options. It's a lot of Viz to spend all at once, but the options are there. The good thing is that since Zazan is sort of lumped with these FFBE characters, that we do have a pretty good chance of getting him back relatively quickly, at least compared to some of the other limited, not just the limited units on the War Division side, but definitely the Collapse side. So at least we have that. And then the last thing I kind of wanted to point out is that the threat of boycott seems like it's happening because this was around the same time that the Japanese version decided to boycott, and you know, they were kind of successful, and I feel like people were kind of already preparing to do something like this no matter what happened. But honestly, I think you should probably look at everything you possibly can if you're going to compare to JP and sort of see where everything balances out. And as I did kind of look back on some of the older events and see what the differences are now compared to then. I will say that I would agree with you that you probably still need time. I think that's probably the biggest factor. And I think we should definitely try to get Gumi to at least give us a little bit more time for either the shop or the Chocobo expeditions. Something, you know, just a little bit more time. Granted, we do have the Mind Sphere shop, which we can just basically go ham on. And I know a lot of people have a lot of Mog Metal saved up, so there's that. And so kind of the last thing I wanted to end with is, I guess we'll see what happens. Like, people will vote with their dollars to see if this was a good idea for Gumi or not. And we'll see the results of that in the coming weeks and months. So I think that's sort of going to determine how Gumi kind of adjusts. But so far, it looks like from YouTube and from Facebook, maybe not so much Reddit, but it looks like from those other two that people still are pulling. So I think that's still going to kind of send the message to Gumi that people did want this and people do see this as a good thing. And that sort of, to me, makes me question, like, is this part of Gumi's plan? Like, is this going all according to what they were thinking? Obviously, they knew that there was going to be some people that didn't like this, but are they still getting the predicted amount of purchases and visual purchases and people pulling as they would have expected? And granted, this is all with thinking that Final Fantasy VII is coming up soon-ish. Did this go according to their plan of getting people to spend before that time? And so the last thing I kind of wanted to say is that they sort of announced it like pretty close to this week. So it's like they kind of a little bit knew that this might have been not received that well. So we didn't really have enough time to organize into a boycott. And so I just say we would have needed more preparation time to be able to form a boycott. And with that, I'll leave you with this last slide, and that is that the War of the Visions timelines have diverged between JP and Global. And so instead of thinking it on the left here like it's Back to the Future and whatever you do in the past affects the future and has a direct effect, you sort of want to start thinking of it in the Dragon Ball Z sort of mindset, where, I'm sorry if I'm spoiling this, but where Trunks came back to the past and sort of, I guess, the present really, and sort of wanted to change things, but they didn't end up changing on his timeline. So they ended up being two different timelines. So I just kind of want to make sure that you guys please consider that we're on two different timelines now, and there's definitely changes that are going to happen on each side. But there is some balance to it, as I hopefully have pointed out to you guys. Anything that happens in the JP differently is kind of adjusted a little bit on the global side. Granted, there's sometimes that it's not that great, such as the Christmas raid that we still haven't gotten, the EX Christmas units that we still haven't gotten, and we're like so far behind on that. So we're gonna probably need a lot of adjustments to those units once we do finally get their EXs. So with all that said, I'm gonna leave it off there, and let me know what you guys think. Please feel free to make any questions or comments down below in the comments. I'll probably not block you for them. I'll try to respond to anything. Just please try to not go too crazy and expect everything, because I just don't think we can really keep expecting everything out of Gumi as this game progresses. Alright, with all that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.